Welcome to Biblical History, and I'm Art Mokarow, your host. We've been covering a subject here rather extensively, which frankly has taken a few programs. We're still working on the program part that has to do that God has done everything that He has done and created everything because it gives Him pleasure. And from that pleasure, we found out that He predestinated everything in the beginning before. And by predestination, what He did, it meant that He thought out the plan. He wrote out the whole picture of what He was trying to do. And in that process, He found out that there were several things that had to transpire. It had to show what His goodness was. Because God did everything He created, He saw was very good. He was pleased with His work. There wasn't one spot or blemish on it. It was beyond perfect. It was the best that anything could be. And we have found out, we finally come to the place in Matthew 19 where Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees. And he was asked a very good question because it starts to delve with the subject of goodness. And when we look at it, it looks like in this chapter, is it really talking about goodness? What is goodness? Well, verse 1, it came to pass in Matthew 19 that when Jesus had finished these sayings, he had talked to 4,000 or 5,000 groups of people, as we found out in the previous programs. They didn't listen to him. They just wanted to be fed. And then he departed from Galilee and came into the coasts of Judea beyond Jordan. Now, there were different provinces ruled by a different hierarchy, what they call primates from Rome. Because at this particular time, during Jesus' time on earth, Rome was supreme. And so they had different provinces, and each province had his own person to run it. So when you crossed over from Galilee, you put yourself in a totally different limelight, or how politics would be carried out. One could be easygoing, like in Galilee. It was a lot simpler there. But as soon as you get into Judea, because they had the temple there, they were very strict. So the Pharisees came up to Jesus, one of the many of the 28 different denominations of Judaism. The Pharisees also came unto him, tempting him, so they want to test him. They wanted to find out, does this guy know what he's talking about? Or is he just a bunch of hot air? So tempting him and saying unto him, is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause? Well, this was right out of the Deuteronomy, which is the rewriting of the law. Let's turn there to Deuteronomy 25 and see what it tells us. There are people today that the theologians call Deuteronomists. Now, people do not realize that the first time God gave the Ten Commandments, there was no law. There was no law given, just the Ten Commandments. And it tells us there in Deuteronomy 5 that when God gave the Ten Commandments, he added nothing more. It was just the Ten Commandments. Of course, they went out and they sinned, they built the golden calf. So when Moses came down from the mountain and he saw what they did, he had these 2 slabs of stone which were written on each side that had the Ten Commandments. And they weren't like we read them. They're just 10 words. 10 words. Now, what in the world can 10 words tell you? Well, those 10 words had so much meaning. We write it out in its complete meaning, and we have the Ten Commandments. Well, when he saw the sin, he got irate. He broke them in half, went back up to the mountain for another 40 days, and guess what? Now they not only had the Ten Commandments, they also had the statutes and the judgments with blessings and cursings. It became a law. And you know what the book of Deuteronomy in Hebrew means? A rewriting of the law. This was different. It wasn't like the first time on just the 2 slabs of stone as commandments, but this specifically dealt with and covered a court order. And when you go to court, if you're guilty, you get a penalty. It's called curses. But if you're not guilty, you're blessed. Things are okay. You can go out and have a good life. So the book of Deuteronomy, actually, theologians call them Deuteronomists because they understood that the Torah, which is the Hebrew name for the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books, and Pentateuch just means 5 books. They're just the first 5 books. They are older in knowledge of the truth than what Moses gave them. So this is the whole history from that God predestined that we found out all the way through the creation. It is, I don't know how many years. It's a yom in Hebrew. It just means time without end. It's eternity. So I don't know. But Deuteronomy was specific. It was precise. It said what it meant, and if you didn't do it, you were guilty, and you had to pay the penalty. That's what a law is, isn't it, people? A law is not a law until there's a penalty. And we have to understand that and comprehend that and realize that. So we see when we get to Matthew 19 to talk about goodness, that this goodness that was proclaimed, frankly, I don't know how long ago it goes. Do you know that there was no calendar that existed as a world calendar until just 500 years ago? This is 2013. We're going back to the 1500s. That was it. So the Pharisees came, and they asked them this question. And in Deuteronomy 24, which is called the Deuteronomist, we're going to find out that it's going to tell us about this question that they were asking Jesus. Is it okay for a man to divorce for any reason, according to the law? Well, in Deuteronomy in verse 1, it says, when a man has taken a wife and married her, and the word married there is not what we think of as marriage, but the word is Baal, B-A-A-L. It's a false god. When he bails her, he becomes the boss. That's what it's telling you. And it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes. He doesn't like her. That's the question. Because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write her a bill of divorcement and give it to her hand and send her out of his house. That's the answer, people. That's what they were asking him in Matthew 19. That's it. So the question is divorce. What is divorce? Well, it was okay according to the law to divorce. So we've got to continue this and take a break now, and we'll continue with the subject of goodness. Well, once again, we're continuing with our subject of goodness. And marriage gets involved in this goodness by the Pharisees coming up to Jesus and asking him, can a man, is it lawful, is it right for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? Well, we found out in Deuteronomy 24, according to the law, it's correct. He could divorce her. According to the law of Moses, God allows divorce. But why does he allow divorce? Because he knows that if you're not acting together in peace and harmony, that house could be a corrupt family. And not only damage to the husband and wife, but the children will be scarred. And not only that, they might end up murdering each other. And God would rather have them part than murder each other for a carnal people. And these were carnal people. The Israelites were carnal. Why were they carnal or like beasts? Because the first thing they did when they got the 10 Commandments, they sinned, right? They didn't obey God, their Father, right from the beginning. I want you to see what they were lacking. They were lacking something very important in Deuteronomy 5 and verse 29. We're going right back to the 10 Commandments when that's all they had, right? And it says very simply and very clearly, here's what God said after the 10 Commandments when he gave them. He knew they weren't going to be reliable. After all, they just came out of slavery. They knew all the gods of Egypt. Moses knew all the gods of Egypt. He was raised as a prince of Egypt. He knew the whole history of Egypt, all about their gods, why they worshiped, everything. And notice here in Deuteronomy 5 and verse 29, right after God just gave them 10 commandments, he says, here's what God told them. Oh, that there were such a heart in them, and a heart means their deep desire. What they want more than anything else, because the heart is a symbol of what pumps life into a person, has a reason for being. That they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be what? That they might get salvation? No, that it might be well with them. All the 10 Commandments can give you by keeping them is a good, prosperous, cared for human existence, but no salvation. No salvation. That's what it gives you, you see. So this question was a very viable question. The problem was they were criminals. They were sinners. They didn't even have a right to go into the promised land, and they couldn't, could they? They had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and that whole generation died in the wilderness. They never got into the promised land. It was the next generation under Joshua that got into the promised land. So the question was very apropos in Matthew 19, what the Pharisees asked him. And then in verse 6, Jesus comes out with this very plain statement. And you don't really grasp, very likely, the extent of this statement. This goes beyond marriage. This statement in reference to marriage gets right to the heart of goodness. What is good and what is not good. All right? Now, I'm going to restate that. When we say something is good, can anything be wrong with it? Of course not. If there's anything wrong with your goodness, then it's not goodness, is it? You know, the Catholic Church, it's an interesting thing to have a teaching. In their philosophy class, I remember when I had my Bachelor of Science degree from that university, and they asked the question, what is evil? What is sin? And you know what they said it was? Their answer was, it was the absence of good. So either something's good or it's not good. Anything less than good is not good, correct? And since God saw that everything he made in Genesis 1:31 in the 7 days was very good, it was so good it was holy or without blemish. So this couldn't even have an iota, not even a smidgen of not being good. So now we're starting to grasp this. Marriage is far more than just a union of a man and woman or a male and female animal. It actually means that to be a marriage has to be without a flaw. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be beautiful? That's why Jesus Christ said very plainly, he says, sufficient for the day is the evil thereof. Don't worry about tomorrow. It's going to have its own problems. Just take them day at a time. Deal with them that way. So here the subject of marriage is way beyond marriage. So in verse 6 of Matthew 19, verse 4, he said, and he answered and said unto the Pharisees, haven't you read, didn't you read this before in the scriptures, that he which made them at the beginning, he's talking about Adam and Eve, isn't he? Made them male and female. Now you know why marriage can only be between a male and female? Because it says so. It says so. Jesus said it, and the Old Testament said it. I mean, the other is a union. I'm not against homosexuality or any of those people. They just don't know better. They were born that way. But weren't we all born that way? Not necessarily sexually, but we were all born with weaknesses and we sin, don't we? Because in Romans, the Apostle Paul says, for we've all sinned and come short of the glory of God. And the word glory means goodness. That's what it means. So here's the striking answer that Jesus gave to them. And this was beginning between male and female when he said this. For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two of them shall be one flesh. That's the answer. What makes something good, the two, the man and the woman, have to develop such a relationship because it's their deep desire by faith to make it work. And that's what counts. So we've come to the place that we find out it's all about marriage is goodness. Well, we found out very graciously that goodness is attached to marriage. That they're synonymous. One applies to the other. And not only that, we're going to find goodness is all about marriage. Because we're only going to find out there's only one who is good. So he's the only one who can make goodness or marriage. I've said this over and over the years in all the different experiences I've had with people. And I've said, if you're going to study the Bible, it's all about marriage. The universe is about marriage. The creation is about marriage. Everything in it is about marriage. All the creatures on earth is about marriage. Everything that's made on earth is about marriage. Now I'm really getting you thinking and saying, what the heck is he referring to? Well, let's see what it tells us. Because we're going to continue on now with verse 6, where he said they have to be, the husband and wife have to become one. They have to be equals. They have to be just like each other. It's an amazing thing when they discovered atoms. And the electrons get drawn to the neutrons. And they're different, aren't they? Right? So we tend to draw together by being opposites. Well, a male and a female are not the same thing, are they? And the answer comes right in the next verse. It's been there for 2,000 years. Don't we get it? 2,000 years. Verse 6. Wherefore they are no more two. They're not two separate beings, but one flesh, one type, whether it be electrons or neutrons. You put two hydrogen atoms together with one oxygen atom. Hydrogen and oxygen are not the same thing. But you put two atoms of hydrogen together with water, and lo and behold, a birth. You got water. A total different entity. The Big Bang, every time in a black hole it explodes, you get a whole bunch of new stars are born. That which was different and drawn together were opposites. And they exploded. And they finally now became a multitude birth of many things. That's why Abraham was told and promised, because he lived by every word that God told him. He in faith believed. He had the right heart, and he says, you're going to have as many children as sand by the seashore. He says, you're going to be able to count all the stars that ever can be, and the universe is still growing, people. You're going to have that many children. Are you getting it? When God says something, it means that. It's not a symbol. It's a comparison. In that way, it's symbolic. But he literally means as many stars as God could make, and planets. As many grains of sand on the seashore, Abraham was going to have that many children. And he's going to, because the book of Revelation tells me that when we get there. That's just what the book of Revelation is about. So it's very succinct. Marriage means not just between a man and a woman. Marriage is whatsoever God joins together, man shall not put asunder. Do you get it? Anything that God created, he's saying, keep your cotton picking fingers out of this. And they are cotton picking fingers too. We used to say that all the time when I was a kid. You better get it. You know, when you go to a doctor and he gives you a pill. And I asked my dentist this one day, and I said to him, I said, you know, every time I get a prescription from you, you write it in Latin. Why don't you write it in English? And you know what he told me? It's all about semantics. It's all about language. He said, the reason we can't tell you what we put in it, because we're afraid we know what we know we can use that makes you better, but the trouble is that we can also kill you. Whatsoever God has not put together, man shall not put asunder. So what goodness is anything God makes is very good. Isn't that what he said? He said it in the beginning. Are you getting the message? Are you grasping the severity of what I'm telling you? When you read this book, you know what's wonderful about this book? Again, I'm going to pause and sidestep a little. Do you know that every holy book in the world is holy? It's just holy to different people. If you were an Egyptian from the children of Mitzrayim in the Bible, the original Egyptians were not Arabs. They're from the children of Mitzrayim. All right? Their holy book is called the Book of the Dead. You know why they call it the Book of the Dead? They tell you how to get out of hell and be resurrected. That's what they tell you. If you go to the Muslims, you go to the Quran. And they are very, very holy books to people who are Muslims. And they should be highly respected. I read the book of Quran. I found out most Muslims have never read it. I read it, but they didn't. You know why? I wanted to see what they believed. And when I checked it, they were right. They believed during their time, because polytheism, or the worship of many gods, was so prevalent, that Muhammad proved there was only one God, one Father, who created all things. It's a holy book to them. You know, if you were an Indian, you'd use the Vedas. Remember, we found out in the beginning that it's the way you think that's important. So the holy book of Vedas, which is the Indian holy book from India for those who believe in that faith, like Buddha, they believe you had to change your mind. So you just get rid of all thoughts in your mind so you can get a new mind. That's a holy book to them. All books are holy. But you know what's unique about this holy book? This book covers all the history of all people. And that's exactly what the Muslims call it. They call it the Book of the People. It's the story of mankind. So we have come to the place that we do grasp the reality that goodness is equal to marriage. So God be with you. We enjoyed having you. This is your host, Art Mokarow, telling you to have a good day, and we hope you all be with us again.